I'm Peter Woolley. I have the pleasure of serving as provost on this campus of Florham. For those of you who might not know, this is one of 4 campuses of Fairleigh Dickinson University. This is, of course, by far the most attractive and progressive and productive. I'm told. Those other campuses, just to review, are in Vancouver, Oxfordshire, and right here in New Jersey. So I want to extend a special welcome, of course, to our own students, faculty, and staff who are with us. But I also want to reach out and extend a welcome to students who might be here from one of the other campuses. Do we have some students from Metro Campus tonight? We do. Raise your hand. We want to see you. Yes. Great. Thank you for coming. And we have some visitors, perhaps from the UN Association. I know we have at least one alum in the back. Do you want to raise your hand so we can stare at you and make you uncomfortable? Very good. Welcome. Welcome to you all. Of course, on this campus, we have many special things. In addition to this lovely home, we have the Public Mind, we have the Literary Review, we have the University Press, all housed here. We have the Rothman Institute for Entrepreneurship, we have the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, and we have the UN Pathways series, which has been going for more than 10 years. And I believe the first visitor was the Spanish ambassador to the United Nations. Tonight we continue the tradition of many years, and we have with us Ambassador Kamal, who has been our long-standing friend and interviewer of our guests, a former member of the Board of Trustees of Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a good neighbor. We also have His Excellency the Ambassador Al-Bayati, who's visiting us from Iraq. And without further ado, I will turn the conversation over to the ambassadors, noting that in a little while, after the very skilled Ambassador Kamal handles the conversation for a while, they'll ask you to join in and pose some questions for our guests. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Hamid Al-Bayati, you are a most unique individual in New York and at the United Nations. Unique for many reasons. Firstly, because you were an ambassador for a very long period, almost 7 years, where most ambassadors have a life of just 3 years. So there was something indispensable about you which led you to survive for more than double the normal life of an ambassador. During that period, you chaired the 6th Committee, which is the Committee of the United Nations, which works on legal norms. It's the most serious part of the United Nations. You were also the Vice President of the General Assembly. You were the Chairman of the Disarmament Committee. And so your experience at the United Nations is very wide. And that is obvious because in the past you had also been the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iraq. So you have a glorious past. But not all your past is positive. You went through imprisonment and torture under a brutal dictatorship. And it does not seem to have affected your sense of humor or your sense of balance and maturity. And so I can only imagine that torture is good for maturity and humor. You also have managed, as a result of your sad experiences, to write a very large number of books, published, available. And those books and your experience led you to lead the movement against the brutal dictatorship in Iraq successfully. And so you are not just an interesting person, you are a person who is eminent in historical terms. And it's therefore a pleasure for me to welcome you to Fairleigh Dickinson University. Thank you very much for being here. But having said that, I want to take you back into the past first, because most of us in this room think of Iraq as Iraq today. But Iraq is not Iraq today. Iraq is a very old country. And so it is Babylon. It is one of the three great river civilizations, the Pharaonic civilization of Egypt, the Euphrates and Tigris civilization of Iraq, and the Indus civilization of India and Pakistan. And these are the three greatest old civilizations. So you have the past in your DNA. Then in 1750 BC, which is a long time ago, particularly in the United States, because here the world starts only in the 18th century or the 17th century. In 1750 BC, you in Iraq came forward with the first code of written laws, which were absolutely remarkable, the Code of Hammurabi, which starts incidentally with the words, I, Hammurabi, hereby enact these laws so that justice may prevail in the kingdom and the strong may not oppress the weak. These are the opening words of the laws of Hammurabi. And that is Iraq, 1750 BC. Then Iraq in the 6th century became the Abbasid kingdom. And you were the center of Islam in Baghdad. You ruled the Islamic world. You were, in fact, the center of the Islamic world. Then, a bit later, you opened in Baghdad the largest library in the world. All Greek texts, which are the basis of Western civilization, all came to the West through Iraq because of Arabic translations of the Greek texts, which then went from Baghdad into North Africa, from North Africa into Spain, and from Spain into the rest of Europe. So everybody here owes you a debt of gratitude for having translated the Greek texts. And so you are a person with a remarkable DNA. And my question to you, my first question, sir, is, do you realize how important is that DNA? Do you know your past? Does it make you shudder and think with humility every time you talk? Because you are not Hamid al-Bayati of today, you are Hamid al-Bayati of 3,000 years ago. Do you realize that?
Well, thank you, Ambassador Kamal. At the outset, I would like to thank everybody in Fairleigh Dickinson University, especially Dr. Murphy, who arranged for this evening. And thank you for coming. I think the fact that humanity started in Iraq, this fact is stated in Genesis in the Old Testament, not in the Quran. It says that the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve lived, had 4 rivers. 2 of them are Tigris and Euphrates. That there's only one country with respect to the civilization in Egypt and Pakistan and India. And this is again according to Genesis, it's in Iraq, in southern Iraq. And it's very well known fact that the birthplace of Abraham Prophet Abraham, the father of Abrahamic religion, was in Ur in southern Iran. To the extent that the Pope, John Paul, with whom I have the pleasure to have a discussion with our president back in 2005, wanted to visit Ur, the birthplace of Prophet Abraham. So definitely humanity and civilization started in Iraq. And since I was a child, I was born in a Muslim family, but when I was only 4 years old, my father put me in a Christian school. It's a school, a church, and a hospital. Until today, it's one of the best private schools and best private hospitals in Baghdad. So I started to go to the church and read the Bible and all these holy texts. And I realized that all these holy books say the same thing, that we are all one big family from one grandfather and grandmother who are Adam and Eve. And I keep reminding people of this fact because unfortunately we live in the world which is completely different than what all these holy books say, that we should live in peace and harmony. And from time to time I come across people who say we don't believe in these holy books, we don't believe in religion, we don't believe in God, we believe in science. And I say, okay, scientific studies show through DNA tests that around 7 million people live today in different continents. They could go back in the history to one man and one woman. And they draw the family tree of these 7 million people going to this man and this woman. So the 7 billion people who live on this world, they could go back to one man and woman in the history. Although I'm from a country with that long history, and the longest civilization we have is over 7,000 years, the Sumerian civilization in southern Iraq, and the Babylonian in central Iraq, and the Assyrian in northern Iraq. I feel humble because I feel I'm human more than anything else. And I believe that we are human not because we are eating or drinking or sleeping, because animals do that. We are humans because we care about others. And humans should care about others. So my DNA tells me that I always live for others. I always stand for others. Yes, I care about myself, I care about my family, I care about my children. But best of the people who care about others and best of the people who help others. I think that DNA helped me to be what I am today. I'm proud that I am an Iraqi, but the most important thing is to be human and to work with other members of this big family whom I meet every day and I feel related to one way or another. And I'm glad, I'm grateful that I managed to help my nation to get out of dictatorship, to have democracy, human rights, rule of law, women's rights, etc., etc. So that's my answer. That's all.
Yes, but Ambassador Bayati, because Iraq is so central to the world, and Baghdad was the largest city in the world in the 10th century, by far the most important city. Because of that, you have drawn in external interventions. Halaku Khan came to Iraq in the 13th century. The Ottomans came into Iraq in the 16th century. The British came into Iraq in the 20th century. The Americans came into Iraq in the 21st century. So you have a history of invasions. What have those invasions done to change your Iraqi DNA?
I think invasions help us to be multicultural society. it helped Iraq to be a center of all kinds of civilizations. Iraq is a rich country. In the old days, the two rivers, maybe it's very rare to have a country in the region with two rivers. Many neighboring countries are desert without even one single river. And in the old days, people were looking for water. In the modern time, they're looking for oil and gas, and Iraq is rich with all kinds of natural resources. For me, those invasions taught Iraqi people to stand up for their country, to stand up for their dignity and integrity. And for me, I was a witness for the invasion in 2003. And as an Iraqi, we give our best advice to the American, to the British, not to have occupation in Iraq, and to set up an Iraqi government immediately after the fall of Saddam regime. And I think one of the biggest mistakes the American did in Iraq was to announce occupation in 2003. And that occupation caused the turmoil and what we called rebellion or resistance or whatever. So invasions, I think, enrich our history. It could affect our DNA, but I think in a positive way.
Yes, but you have to acknowledge that Iraq is a sad country today. Law and order has broken down. You spoke of rule of law. There's no rule of law in Iraq today. Everybody is bombing and killing everybody else. Iraq was always, you say, I'm an Iraqi. But the sectarian strife now in Iraq is so deep. I have visited Iraq several times. Nobody knew who was a Shia or a Sunni or a Kurd. An Iraqi was an Iraqi. But today, you are either a Shia or a Sunni or a Kurd. And this sectarian division of Iraq is a result of 2003. It did not exist before 2003. I mean, all of us were different, but you never had this type of divisions. And these divisions are now impacting the law and order because everybody is happily bombing everybody else. And so, when you say that, and you have played, as I said, a very important role in the establishment of the new order. But that new order, while it was very gentle and correct when it was established, unfortunately has not survived. And so, what are the reasons why it has not survived? Your intentions were good, but it did not work. Why not?
Ambassador, I have to disagree with this. Because when Saddam tried to wipe out the Kurds, when he used chemical weapons to kill thousands of them, and in one attack on 16th of March 1988, he attacked Halabja city with chemical and biological weapons. 5,000 Kurds were killed. More than 10,000 were injured. People died. Water was contaminated. Animals and the plants died. And this is one of many, many attacks with chemical and biological weapons. You think the Kurds will feel easy about this? In the Anfal campaign, 182,000 Kurds were arrested and disappeared, completely vanished. We discovered hundreds of mass graves all over Iraq, full with bodies of civilians, women and children. So the Kurdish problem didn't start after 2003. It started when the regime played on the ethnic card by claiming that Saddam is an Arab hero against non-Arabs, be they Kurds, be they Turkomans, be they Assyrian Christian, who are the indigenous people of Iraq. And when Saddam started Iraq-Iran war in 1980, and because Iran is a Shiite majority country, he played the card of being a Sunni hero against the Shiite, who are infidels, who are non-Arabs, who are Indians, who are backwards, uneducated people. So the two pillars of Saddam policy was discrimination, ethnic and sectarian discrimination. However, after the invasion of Kuwait, which is a Sunni country and an Arab country, I think Saddam lost all his pretext. And then he started to turn against the Sunnis, who are his people, when the Sunnis discovered that he's not against the Kurds, he's not an Arab hero, neither a Sunni hero, but he's a criminal. And they start to try to overthrow him. And then he oppressed his own people. He killed two sons-in-law, so he made his daughters widows and his grandchildren orphans. He killed another brother-in-law and a cousin. So we end up having the Iraqi people divided by Saddam's policies. We inherited a divided society. We inherited a ruined country after more than 24 years of wars. 8 years war with Iran, invasion of Kuwait, liberation of Kuwait, Desert Storm, Desert Fox, 2003 war, and then the occupation, and so many things. So it's not 2003 and after, it's before that. The Ba'ath Party came to power through a military coup in 1963 for the first time. They came to power in 1968 in the second military coup. And Saddam became vice president in 1969, president 1979, until 2003. Almost 4 decades of the same policies. That's what changed Iraq. From the Iraq I was born in and lived in, from the Iraq where we didn't ask each other what your religion or sect or ethnic group is, to Iraq all about these issues.
Yes, but I remember that a US Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, speaking about Iraq, said, "What Middle East are you talking about? We constructed the Middle East after the Ottoman Empire, therefore we can change it as we wish. And we should divide Iraq into 3 parts, a Kurdish part, a Sunni part, and a Shia part." And some of us argued with this position and said, if you try, first of all, Iraq is not a game that you can play with. It's a very historical country with a very historical past. It's the center of the Arab world. And people don't know this. People think Saudi Arabia is the center. That's not correct. Iraq is the center of the Arab world. And you cannot play with a cultural center. And unfortunately, what has happened is that as a result of this sectarian divide in Iraq, the country that has been really strengthened as a result is Iran. Iran has expanded its influence in the Middle East thanks to the US invasion of Iraq. And that is a strategic change in the Middle East. And I would like your views on it, because it's not just the present, it's also the future that I'm going to be asking you about. But what is happening in the rest of the Middle East is because the status quo has been changed. And once you change the status quo, you are then no longer in control of what is going to come afterwards. And so sometimes it is better to be with the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so I again ask you this question. I know what you have been through in Iraq. I know what you have been through yourself. I know what your family has been through, because you have had family members who have been assassinated and murdered. So I know you. But the devil you know and the devil you don't. Are you sure that the Iraq of today is better than the Iraq of yesterday?
Well, again, first of all, whoever talk about dividing Iraq into three parts, including Vice President Joe Biden, proved to be mistaken. We still have one Iraq. We don't have three states in Iraq. But I believe that you could have one country divided into civil war or, conflict, sectarian conflict. However, we have two ways in Iraq for the future. Either we go back to the Iraq we lived in for centuries, where everybody lived in peace and harmony, or we go into a full-scale sectarian war or civil war. And I have to tell you and assure you that the majority of the Iraqis, and they are the best guarantee for the future, they don't like any kind of conflict or war. I know that around me, the Iraqis whom I know, friends, relatives, colleagues, regardless of their background, and we are very mixed. Even mixed marriages are everywhere. I was invited to address a big gathering of Christian Iraqis in Modesto outside San Francisco. There were like 500 people. And there were families with mixed marriages between Muslims and Christians. I know between Sunnis and Shiites is much wider in Iraq, and between Arabs and Kurds and other communities. In actual fact, I was in a conference about this division between Iraqis, and there was a lady from the Ministry of Planning whose father was Sunni, mother was a Shia, and husband being a Kurd. So she was a symbol for Iraqi unity because she loves her father, her mother, and her husband. So, again, unfortunately, I have to say that what make Iran strong is Saddam. Iran-Iraq war in 1980 make Iran strong. Because then Iran start manufacturing all kinds of weapons. Any country who is in a war, which is in a war, they have to manufacture weapons. And the strongest thing in Iran now is military manufacturing, not like civilian industry. So, American in Iraq, they did mistakes. We Iraqis did mistakes. But if Saddam stay in power, we don't rule out that his son could rule Iraq and his grandson could rule Iraq. Now, for the first time in the history, we have an ex-president, Sheikh Ghazi al-Yawar. We have two ex-prime ministers, Dr. Ayad Allawi and Dr. Ibrahim al-Ja'fari. We used to have executed presidents and executed prime ministers. That's the big difference. We have elections every year. We have a parliament in which we have 25% women. How many countries, Dr. Ambassador Kamal, can you think of 25% women in their parliament? Congress in the US, parliament in England, in France, in Germany. And when Iraq adopted the constitution of 25% women in their parliament, we have some Arab countries who didn't allow women to vote, let alone to run for office. And these countries changed their laws to allow women to vote and to run for office. And so many experts, so many journalists wrote, and you can check that Arab Spring started in Iraq. And Iraq inspired other Arab nations to have democracy and to topple dictatorship. So I'm not saying Iraq is the best situation. I'm not saying that we achieve all our objectives, but definitely we are much better than Saddam regime. And not only Iraq, but the whole world and the region is much better. They are better off without Saddam.
Would you like to talk a bit about the relationship between Iraq and Iran? Because the relationship is becoming closer. As a precondition, I just want you to know that I was in the conference on disarmament when the chemical weapons were used by Saddam Hussein against Halabja and the Iranians. And the question was asked of us. I was presiding the conference on disarmament. Will the CD take note of the chemical weapons use by Iraq? And being a person who believes in consensus, I went round, I asked people, including the United States ambassador, and I said, chemical weapons have been used, we are negotiating a chemical weapons convention. Shouldn't we take note? And the US ambassador reported back to Washington, and Washington gave him instructions to say, ask Ambassador Kamal not to raise this subject. And so, out of politeness and a desire for consensus, I did not raise the subject in the Conference on Disarmament. But it was US policy not to take note of the use of chemical weapons by Iraq against its own citizens and against Iran. And the Iranians have never forgotten that. Never. But now relations between Iraq and Iran have improved significantly. How do you see those relations? And how do you see the development of that relationship between two important neighboring countries, both of which are centers of intellectual thought?
Well, some people accuse the Iraqi government of being American puppets and American agents. And some will accuse the Iraqi government of being Iranian agents and Iranian puppets. The fact that Iraq has good relation with both Iran and the United States is a good proof that the Iraqi policy is neutral and independent. More than that, we help the Americans to handle many issues in Iran. Like we hosted a meeting of P5+1 about nuclear issue. We helped to release some Americans who were arrested in Iran. Maybe you don't see that in the media, unfortunately, because not everything is mentioned in the media. Sometimes only negative side of the picture is mentioned in the media. So basically our policy is to have good relation with all neighboring countries after Saddam had a policy of hostility against neighboring countries and having 2 wars with neighboring countries. But of course our relation with the United States and with those countries who helped Iraq to get rid of dictatorship and to build democracy is going to be strategic, long-term relationship. And we signed with the United States an agreement, we called it Strategic Framework Agreement, about all kinds of relationship in the future after the withdrawal of the US forces and after we signed the Status of Forces Agreement, the SOFA. We believe that as Iraqi government policy, we should have good relation with Iran and all neighboring countries, and we are not interested in any hostile policy. We help the world to try to convince the Iranian to be part of the international community. We believe that the Middle East should be free of nuclear weapons and all kinds of WMDs. We try our best to mediate between Iran and the West, especially the United States. So we are trying our best, but our relation is good, not only with Iran, but we have good relation and strategic relationship with Europe and the United States.
One of the very amusing facts is that Al-Qaeda, that is, say, Osama bin Laden, had 2 specific objectives. One was to get rid of American troops from Saudi Arabia, and the other was to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And surprisingly, the United States has managed to achieve both these objectives for Al-Qaeda. Do you realize that there is a community of interest between the United States and Al-Qaeda in these objectives?
I think the first objective of Al-Qaeda is to kill American. Does not mean America is killing the American to achieve Al-Qaeda objective. The withdrawal of U.S. forces from the United States was inevitable. They went there to liberate Kuwait. And they went there not to stay. I don't think they intend to stay. Neither the Saudi government will allow them to stay forever. Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda objective was to kill as many Americans as possible, including Muslims in the United States. And he justified that by saying Muslims are paying taxes to the American government, so they are helping the American government to kill Muslims. Therefore, we justify killing American, including American Muslims. I published 12 books, 2 of them about terrorism, one about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, another one about terrorism in Iraq. My last book, I just want to show it to the people, was published by Pennsylvania University Press, From Dictatorship to Democracy. And I know what Osama bin Laden philosophy is. And I don't think the Americans are serving Al-Qaeda by doing what they did. There are another argument which I listened to on YouTube. An official in the Gulf said, actually, the United States helped Iran to achieve their objectives because Iran want to control the Gulf and the American enabled them to do that. And Iran want to control Iraq and the American enabled them to do that. I think the American, and this is a very important subject, so allow me just to elaborate, because I think many Americans also don't understand the real issue about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda attacked American troops twice in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh and in Khobar, and they killed American soldiers. America didn't rush and go all the way to kill Al-Qaeda or to invade Afghanistan. Then they attacked in Yemen, US escort, and they killed 17 sailors. And America didn't rush and go to attack Al-Qaeda. Then they attacked in Kenya and Tanzania. And then America didn't rush and go to attack Taliban regime or Al-Qaeda. They just arrested Abu Anas al-Libi a couple of weeks ago in Libya, who was responsible for Kenya and Tanzania. However, when Al-Qaeda managed to kill more than 3,000 Americans, including American Muslims in 9/11, the whole world and the United Nations authorized the Security Council and the United States to have the war against terrorism. And before they attacked, they asked Taliban regime to hand over Osama bin Laden, who announced responsibility for the attack of 9/11. And Taliban refused. Imagine if Al-Qaeda continue to be hosted by Taliban, and if they manage to get weapons of mass destruction, chemical and biological weapons, what could have happened? And with Osama bin Laden mentality of killing as many people as possible, inflicting as much damage as possible, we could have several 9/11s, could be similar or worse. Do you expect any government in the world to stand still waiting for their enemy to attack again and again? People forget. Some Americans believe that the war in Iraq was a war of choice. We shouldn't have gone to Iraq and take Saddam out. They forget what Saddam did in 1990 when Saddam invaded Kuwait. They forget that Saddam mobilized his troops again to re-invade Kuwait. And then America couldn't go, or the whole world, or Europe, or, they cannot go every couple of years to liberate Kuwait again. If Saddam managed to get away with the invasion of Kuwait, he will invade all Gulf countries, he will control 40 to 50% of the oil in the world, and then he blackmail the West. So we need to be really realistic in our analysis, and we need to look at the picture from different angles. Because when we look to the situation from one angle, we could have a misleading picture. A lot of people blame United States for attacking or going to Afghanistan or going to Iraq here and there. But what do you expect after 9/11? To wait for another 9/11? It's impossible.
There's no disagreement about what you have said, because this is a perfect analysis. But politics makes for very strange bedfellows. And we see this happening now in Syria. The Al-Qaeda subordinate institution in Syria, which is Al-Nusra, has the objective of getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. And the American objective is to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. It's a coincidence of objectives. And so this coincidence of objectives is going to lead to a strengthening of al-Nusra in Syria, unless the United States backs down and says, okay, let Bashar al-Assad continue, which is not easy because he's another Saddam Hussein. And the problems that you had in Iraq are being repeated in Syria today. And so, if you were the United States, or better still, if you were God, how would you resolve the problem of Syria today? You are hereby promoted to God.
Cannot be the United States, neither I would.
No, so be God instead.
Imagine God has his own way to deal with the world. There is certain rules which go on the world. But let me talk about Syria. This is a very important issue. And maybe I will look to this issue differently from what you hear in the media again. Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden was created in Afghanistan. After the Russian or the Soviet invasion to Afghanistan, the United States support what they called Mujahideen, Arab Mujahideen in Afghanistan, including Osama bin Laden. And those Arab Mujahideen have the training in Afghanistan, they have the weapons, they have the expertise, and they became Al-Qaeda who started to attack the Americans, as I mentioned earlier, in different parts of the world. And this is the first generation of Al-Qaeda. The second generation of Al-Qaeda, we had it in Iraq, when Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi and what we call Islamic State in Iraq were fighting the Americans and the Iraqis at the same time. That second generation managed to kill so many American soldiers, more than 4,500 American soldiers in Iraq. That is the second generation of Al-Qaeda and terrorists. Now the third generation of terrorists and Al-Qaeda were in North Africa, in Libya, when tons of weapons were dropped in the desert, and these weapons were used to kill American ambassador on 9/11/2012. And those weapons were used, they were smuggled from Libya to many countries in the region, including Algeria, when they attacked a gas plant and they took foreign hostages. This is the third generation of terrorists and Al-Qaeda. Now I'm warning from this podium about the fourth generation of terrorists and the fourth generation of Al-Qaeda who are being trained and weaponized and having the expertise in Syria, who will come as new Afghani Mujahideen. They're going to come from Syria to the rest of the world. Especially, there are reports of hundreds of Europeans, Australians, and Americans fighting with Jabhat al-Nusra or other terrorist groups. Jabhat al-Nusra only one of maybe 12 terrorist groups fighting in Syria. So one has to be very careful to distinguish between Syrian people who should decide their future and terrorist groups who might use the situation in Syria for their benefit, and they could manage to attack. And I think the attack in Kenya against this mall, shopping center, is a good example of terrorists being able to attack and have Western targets all over the world.
I want to go a bit deeper into this because Al-Qaeda, you have already said that Al-Qaeda has gone into 4 generations. That is a remarkable thing for an organization which was a limited number of people, but to be able to morph into 4 generations and to spread geographically in this fashion shows that it must have some internal strength. What is that internal strength? Is it an organization or is it a movement? Because is there a link between Al-Qaeda, the objective of which is only to kill Americans, and the Taliban, the objective of which is different? It is to fight against the concept of materialistic capitalism. And so these 2 forces have coincided. And that makes it into a very powerful movement. But I may be totally wrong. And that's why I ask you this question, because nobody knows this better than you know it. Is Al-Qaeda plus Taliban, is it an organization or is it a movement?
First of all, let me make sure that people can hear me well in the back. Yeah? Okay. I'm sorry about earlier,
No, the problem is that you are a very soft-spoken gentleman.
Thank you.
And you have, here you have to show your Iraqi virility.
Okay. I think Al-Qaeda started as an organization, but it's evolved. And now Al-Qaeda is a movement. Is it a strong movement? A lot of American officials say we managed to break Al-Qaeda, we managed to, did this, did that. But the fact that they are not going to disappear, because there's all kind of reasons for their existence. And there is everything they need. From time to time, they will find a safe haven. They had a safe haven in Afghanistan. They had a safe haven in Iraq. Now they have a safe haven in Syria. And in these safe havens, they have everything they need. They have the money, they have the weapons, they have the training. So all those reasons are enough to make them exist, and sometimes to make them, spread in many parts of the world. Unfortunately, I don't see any holistic or comprehensive solution. The world is reacting to Al-Qaeda activities. So when they were in Afghanistan, we focus on Afghanistan. They attack in Yemen and we focus on Yemen. They go to Mali and we jump to Mali. There's no comprehensive solution to treat the problem in a way to uproot the problem. And a lot of people believe that the West failed in fighting Al-Qaeda. A lot of people believe that they are doing their best and they are successful. But I think we need to learn from the people who could understand Al-Qaeda, who could understand the mentality of Osama bin Laden and these people. And you need people on the ground. I'll give you one example, because there are so many examples. I went back to Iraq a month after Saddam regime fall, in May 10th, 2003. And I met American officials, American military officers. The first military commander I met was General McKernan. So I met him and we were talking about security issues in Iraq. He said, Hamid, the problem, American soldiers are shot in the street of Baghdad. And yesterday we have a group of soldiers, somebody pulled a gun and shot 2 of them. I said, yes, of course, because any American soldiers cannot tell who is a friend, who is a foe. You have to depend on Iraqis. I live in a neighborhood, in a house. I was born in a house. My grandfather bought it in 1948. My father lived in this house all his life. I was born in this house. Until now, we still own the same house. And all my family live in this neighborhood. So you have to depend on local people because they know each other. I could tell you about every single family in this neighborhood. And even if I don't know a family, I could ask anybody in the neighborhood, they could tell me about them, the same street. He said, we don't want to have militias. I said, nobody's talking about militias. You have neighborhood watch everywhere in the world. Then, July 2003, I have a member of British Parliament who organized one-on-one meeting with Tony Blair, the Prime Minister in England at that time. So after we greet each other, he said, what do you think we could do to improve security in Iraq? I said, you have to depend on Iraqis. He said, do you think they can do it? I said, if the Iraqis cannot do it, there's no army in the world can do it. You think American army will be able, or British army, or French army, or any other army in the world can maintain security in Iraq if the Iraqis themselves don't maintain security? So what I am saying is that you need to listen to the people of the country. I felt sometimes pity for American soldiers who were brought from anywhere in the United States, not knowing the culture, not knowing the language, not knowing the traditions in Iraq. And the soldiers were trained to fight a war. They were not trained to police streets of Iraq. And they won the war. They toppled Saddam regime in 3 weeks with no single soldier being lost. But when they were start to patrolling streets, there were attacks, you know. So many snipers were hunting American soldiers from high building, and one of them was from the ground. The problem in the building, you could easily find a sniper, but he was so professional, he was hunting Americans so in one bullet because he knew where to hit. And the whole American soldiers in Iraq were fighting from this one person because he was so professional. He wasn't shooting from high building, he was shooting from the ground. So what I am saying is that you put American soldiers in the wrong job. You cannot give a policeman job to a soldier or a soldier to another. So what I am saying is that you have to depend, you have to listen to the people on the ground. When you fight Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, you have to listen to the Afghani. When you fight Al-Qaeda in Iraq, you have to listen to the Iraqis, and so on and so forth.
I have one more question that I want to ask you before we open to the floor. And this question is about Saudi Arabia. There is no doubt in my mind that what is called the Arab Spring, which is a meaningless term, is a fallout from the fall of Saddam Hussein. So it really started in Iraq. But now, in the past 2 or 3 weeks, we have seen absolutely remarkable changes in Saudi Arabia. For example, in the last General Assembly, the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia refused to come to address the General Assembly. This has never happened in the past. Then last week, Saudi Arabia was elected to a non-permanent seat in the Security Council, and they refused. And they said, we do not want a seat in the Security Council. And they slapped the United Nations by saying it's a useless organization. The Security Council is not doing its work at all. But that slap is not really a slap at the United Nations. It's a slap at the United States. And that is remarkable because Saudi Arabia is a very close ally of the United States. And when a close ally begins to publicly take position against you, then this is going to change the strategy of the Middle East. Other countries will begin to ask questions also. Now that is my reading. And I once again acknowledge that I may be totally wrong. What is your reading of the strategic change which is taking place in the Middle East, of which the Saudi decisions are only one element?
I think what happened in the last General Assembly, the biggest thing which happened in the General Assembly was very obvious to the whole world. It's the first time President Obama talked to Iranian president since 1979. And that was public. And the same day, Prince Saud Al Faisal, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, announced that he will not deliver his speech. And the same day, we've heard that there will be another surprise. Now, I know there are double standards in the world. I know there are double standards in the UN. But everything which happened in the UN and the Security Council was obvious for everybody. There's nothing new except this element. It's a regret that Saudi Arabia doesn't take a seat in the Security Council because we need to be in the Security Council, and Saudi Arabia represents the whole Arab world in the Security Council. And every 2 years there is a new Arab member from the Arab world in the Security Council. So they represent the Arab group, the League of Arab States. And Saudi Arabia is an important country in the Arab world. They are the strongest Arab country with strong economy, the largest oil producer in the world. So we regret that we don't see a strong country in the Security Council which could have an effect on the policies of the Security Council or have influence. Now, if they withdraw, we have to have another Arab country to replace them, and that's another problem now. So the double standard is there, and their statement says because there is double standard in the Security Council, and the Security Council not doing its duty about Palestine or about Syria or about other things. But I think the fact that there is this rapprochement between the United States and Iran upset the Saudis as well. They are a sovereign country. They have the right to draw their policies, and we could understand these policies. But personally, I wish if Saudi Arabia stay in the Security Council. And they were well prepared. They had a team from Saudi Arabia who was training, or who had training in the US, in New York, about the Security Council. I know that the mission was about to celebrate their winning the elections in the General Assembly when they decide not to take the seat. I hope that whoever replaces Saudi Arabia, I hope really they will change their mind and they will take the seat, because officially they haven't submitted their request. They just announced that, but they have to submit a request officially with a replacement. I hope they will change their mind. There is an attempt by Arab countries to convince them to take that seat. And I know the ambassador of Saudi Arabia, he is a very competent ambassador, very good person, and I think he will serve Saudi Arabia and the whole Arab world by taking that seat. But if they insist of withdrawing, I hope that the replacement will be able to fill the gap, because we don't want to see any gap for Arabs in the Security Council.
Why do you really reproach it offend Saudi Arabia?
No, the problem is, firstly, that this decision is not taken at the ambassadorial level. This decision is taken at the level of the King of Saudi Arabia. And so I do not see any way in which it can be reversed. So the question is, I agree with you that the rapprochement between the United States and Iran has touched off this reaction of Saudi Arabia. But it has an impact for the whole of the Arab world, and it has an impact for Iran. You just have to compare the smile on the face of Jawad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, with the absence of a smile on the face of Prince Saud Al Faisal, who has become totally serious now. So the geopolitics of the region is shifting. Is that normal? Is that good? Is that inevitable? That was my question. Are you adjusted to it?
I think we need to realize the fact that the whole world and the whole international community will be interested in seeing the issue of a nuclear project in Iran solved. This is very important, especially for Iraq. We have a long borders with Iran, and the nuclear project in Iran could affect the whole region, but specifically and especially Iraq. And I think it's in the interest of the international community to handle that file through peaceful means and diplomacy rather than military means and wars. However, there's a feeling in the Gulf in general, and maybe in Saudi Arabia in particular, that rapprochement could be on the benefit of the Arab world and the Gulf specifically. I don't think the United States will consider their relation with Iran as a priority. I think they consider Saudi Arabia as an ally. They consider the Gulf as allies because they are the major source of oil and energy in the world. And they want to keep that kind of relationship. However, there's frustration about the Syrian issue. There is frustration about the Palestinian issue. President Obama in his first term, he said, I would love, in the General Assembly, I would love to see a Palestinian state next year in the General Assembly. That didn't happen. Negotiation between Palestinians and Israelis are not going nowhere. So there is frustration among the Arabs, and especially in Saudi Arabia, about both Palestinian and Syrian issue. When it comes to the Iranian issue, maybe they were not consulted about the rapprochement and that issue. So all these, so I agree completely with Ambassador Kamal that the issue of rapprochement triggered what happened. But I think the Saudi leadership are wise enough to realize that if there will be a peaceful solution for the nuclear issue in Iran, that could help to solve the issue, in other countries in the region, like Palestinian issue or the Syrian issue.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Provost, I'd like to open the floor for questions. And do you want me to moderate the questions, or would you like to moderate the questions?
I think you should continue to moderate.
Okay, in that case, the floor is open for questions. If you put up your hand, a microphone will come to you. Microphone for the gentleman with the New York Yankees cap. Giants, sorry, I don't know the difference.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you.
For me?
Yeah.
I'm not the speaker, he's the speaker.
But like you brought up something before which I had a question about. I was just wondering, do you think Al Qaeda was behind the chemical attacks in Syria as opposed to the government?
I think we should ask Ambassador Al-Bayati. The question is that the general media in the United States is absolutely sure, and so is the US government, that the chemical weapons use in Syria was done by the government, that is to say by President Bashar al-Assad. But it is also a fact that chemical weapons were used 6 months earlier. And the Syrian government had brought the matter up in front of the United Nations and said chemical weapons have been used, meaning the opposition has used them, and please send an inspection team. And the United Nations, under pressure from somebody, did nothing. And so, I don't know, but Ambassador Bayati, who used the chemical weapons? You are the expert on chemical weapons because they were used against you in the past.
The United Nations team investigated the attacks. Unfortunately, they didn't specify which part used those weapons. They just went to verify whether chemical weapons were used and what sort of chemical weapons were used. Now, I am, as a person, I'm not in a position to decide who used those weapons. It must be international body, it must be the UN, or other governments. So, as Mr. Kamal said, the media and the US government were sure that it was used by the regime. However, the regime earlier reported to the UN that chemical weapons were used by the opposition. Al-Qaeda was always hoping to get weapons of mass destruction, or at least the expertise to manufacture them, because they can manufacture them anywhere. Chemical weapons, sometimes they are easy to manufacture. If you have an expert who could do them, they could have the material to manufacture them. That's the real danger of Al-Qaeda getting these kind of weapons.
I'd just like to add, because this question is something that I've dealt with throughout my diplomatic career. The Middle East has chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. And the only way to resolve this is by getting rid of all weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, which is the proposal made originally by Egypt several years ago. This proposal is voted every year in the General Assembly and it passes by consensus. So the fact that we want a Middle East free of weapons of mass destruction is agreed. The problem is in what sequence. The Israeli position is, yes, but first let us have peace. Then we will have weapons free of mass destruction. And the rest of the Arabs say, no, let's get rid of the weapons of mass destruction and let's keep talking about peace. And so the chicken and the egg is being passed around all the time. And as a result, you have large stocks of nuclear weapons and you have large stocks of chemical weapons. So Syria is in minor case in chemical weapons. It's not a major case. Major supplies of chemical weapons in the Middle East are outside Syria.
Can I add something to that that's very important, what Ambassador Kamal said? When the NPT was due to be renewed, both conferences of 1995 and 2005 agreed with consensus. The whole world agreed that they will renew the NPT agreement or treaty, not proliferation treaty, with a condition that a conference to have Middle East free of nuclear weapons and other kind of WMDs to be held in 2012. And that conference was postponed, and the Arab countries objected to the postponement because it was supposed to be held in 2012. So that's part of the discussion which is going on in the UN about having the Middle East free of nuclear weapons and all kinds of WMDs.
floor is open. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. No, microphone.
Thank you for sharing your ideas with us, and we heard a very interesting perspective. I would like just to ask you, just for the record, you have mentioned Al-Qaeda as a group of people, their goal is basically to kill Americans. Wasn't Al-Qaeda itself funded and trained initially in the 1970s by the American government? And wasn't the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt in the 1950s and until recently funded by the CIA and supported by the CIA? And to complicate matters, I mean, we try to tell our students to develop their critical thinking and develop those skills of looking at things from a different perspective. Why in the end Al-Qaeda does not really kill Swedish people, Norwegians, or Germans or French or Greeks, but only after Americans? What is it about Americans that, as in your perspective, in your view, that Al-Qaeda is really following? And final point, I'm sorry to keep you with this. What was the human cost and suffering to the Iraqi people as a result of the American invasion? Thank you.
Let me start with the last point.
I just want to warn you that there are now a large number of UN diplomats who have arrived listening to you, so be careful of what you say.
Now, the human suffering after 2003, I mentioned earlier that Americans did mistakes and we did mistakes as Iraqis. There's no exact figure of how many were killed. But if you calculate how many were killed through Saddam regime time, like the wars, again, there is no exact figure. Like Iraq-Iran war for 8 years, the invasion of Kuwait, the liberation of Kuwait. It's very obvious that hundreds of thousands were killed, and it was well recorded that, during the wars, these long years of wars, hundreds of thousands were killed, many, double of that number were injured and handicapped. Now, after 2003, how many Iraqis were killed? If you're talking about Iraqis killed by the Americans, that's something. Or killed by the Iraqi government, that's something. But if you talk about people killed by terrorists, such as Al-Qaeda, Dawlat al-Iraq al-Islamiyya, which is affiliated to Al-Qaeda, car bombs until today are planted everywhere in Iraq. And in some of these attacks, a car bomb could kill 50 people, injured hundreds. Yes, they are. They could reach the same number. But who's responsible for those attacks? Is it the American? Is it the Iraqi government? Is it the Iraqi people? What can I say is that those car bombs are done by not only Al-Qaeda, but the remnants of Saddam. There are so many organizations. Openly, publicly, on the internet, they announce their loyalty to Saddam. They praise him, they have his pictures. And there is Izzat al-Duri, who was the vice president, who was deputy of Saddam. He is leading those movements. So publicly they announced that they are fighting the Iraqi government. Now American troops left end of 2011. So the remnants of Saddam regime are fighting the Iraqi government. They plant car bombs, they attack soldiers and civilians at the same time. If they plant a car bomb, the car bomb could kill soldiers or civilians. So the total number is so difficult to calculate, but who is responsible of how many people killed, that another issue. So if you want to say American killed more than Saddam, the answer is no, definitely. If you are assuming that the Iraqi government killed more Iraqis than Saddam, the answer is no, definitely, and I can't challenge anybody to prove the opposite. But if you say how many terrorists commit murder against Iraqis, how many Al-Qaeda, how many remnants of Saddam, how many people killed altogether, that could be similar, less or more, I don't know. If you can get me a specific numbers through specific statistics, I'll be grateful. But there are official statistics by the Iraqi government about the dead people. The majority of them are killed by terrorist groups in Iraq.
Floor is open. Yes, sir. No, can I go back first? At the back, the gentleman with the glasses.
My name is Kevin Saliska, and my question is this. You guys say that Iraq have a
No,
partnership.
louder.
You guys say that you have a relationship with America and Iran, but Iran serves a potential threat to America because Iran has a relationship with Syria. So if America goes into a conflict with Syria, if America gets in conflict with Syria and Iran gets involved with it because Iran is close to Syria, where will Iraq stand between America and Iran?
Okay. Well, as we said earlier, there was a telephone call between President Obama and President Rouhani of Iran. So that made them talking about negotiation regarding the nuclear issue. And I think part of the negotiation will be about other issues in the region, including the situation in Syria or other issues. So I think when President Obama decided to talk to President Rouhani, there must be a policy in the United States to open that kind of door with the Iranians, and they think maybe they could resolve, especially the nuclear issue, through negotiation. Now, I don't see America now involved militarily in Syria. There is no sign that President Obama or the administration is willing to interfere militarily. So your question is hypothetical. I don't think America will go to war in Syria and then the Iranians will fight them there or whatever. Okay?
May I add something? Your question is totally hypothetical. There is not a single shred of evidence that Iran is on the path to nuclear weaponry. And the United States itself has stated that there is no evidence whatsoever. Number two, it is totally legal under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Article 4, for Iran to enrich uranium up to 20%. Totally legal. The position of the United States is, we know what you are doing is legal, but we suspect that your intentions are bad. Now, in law, you cannot base law on intentions and suspicions. You have to produce evidence, and there is no evidence, zero evidence. And so, don't read things in the media. Study this more carefully. Study Article 4 of the NPT. Study the Iranian position. Read the official American documents. The official statements of the United States say that there is no evidence. The same is true of the official statements of the International Atomic Energy Agency. But obviously, suspicions, I may suspect what you are up to. Mr. Moses was under suspicion from the Pharaoh, who said, I suspect that when he grows up, he's going to kill me, so let me throw him into the river straight away. But he survived, Moses, and that is the result why we say in law that suspicions cannot be evidence. May I, with your permission, go take a right-wing question, because too many left-wing questions have been asked. And it depends on which side you are looking at the audience from. I'll come back to you, I promise.
Well, thank you, ambassadors, for coming to our university, and specifically for Ambassador Bayati. The title of their talk is Rebuilding Iraq, Envisioning Iraq's Future. I tend to do a lot of business in the Middle East, and there is absolute consensus that Iraq has unbelievable potential economically. Not only just in natural resources, which is probably the initial focus and can be immediately tapped, but intellectually, business-wise, universities being successful. We're here at a university, and universities are optimistic places. So my direct question is, what is Iraq doing to advocate foreign direct investment into the country so that you can sell the vision to governments, corporations, and get foreign direct investments to participate. Because if the future is as bright as it can be, there's no doubt that there are interested parties around the world that want to invest in that future. But what specifically is happening to solicit foreign direct investment into the future of your country?
Can I ask a supplementary to that? Do you have double taxation, avoidance of double taxation agreements with the United States and others, for example?
Well, one of the most important things is that we have international guarantees to investors. We, through the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, investors are worried, like what happened during the Ba'ath Party time when the government confiscated foreign assets for companies. So now there are guarantees that any foreign investments are going to be guaranteed. There will be no nationalization of any of these foreign assets. One. Second, many laws were changed to attract investments. Like the government changed the law to allow foreign companies to own the lands if they want to build projects. Thirdly, there's incentives for foreign investments in Iraq, like tax abatements and other things. Thirdly, there are encouragement by giving lands to certain projects, long lease lands in Iraq. Another step is to have one window, which means one body to deal with all foreign investment. They used to go to this ministry and to this part of the government institutions. Now there's one window, which is National Investment or Foreign Investment Foundation. So you go to one place, one body, which deal with every Iraqi institution to solve the issue of foreign investments. I'll be very frank with you. During the last 7 years, which I served as Iraqi ambassador, many companies came to me, and the most worrying thing for them is the security situation. And that's the issue now. Otherwise, there are companies from all over the world, American big companies, oil, gas companies, construction. Iraq, as you said, we have a lot of natural resources, oil and gas, minerals, water. Iraq needs to be rebuilt, the whole infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. So there is a rich country with a huge potential. We increased our budget from $30 billion in 2005 to $140 billion, maybe more. Every year we have supplement budget of $20 to $25 billion because the prices of oil are estimated less than the real price, just in case if the oil price go down. So there is a huge budget, there is huge potential. However, the Security Council, security situation, still an issue and a concern for but we are trying our best to give guarantees, to give incentives, and to encourage foreign companies to invest. And one of the ways I advise foreign companies to avoid the security issue is to hire Iraqis to do the job inside Iraq. Americans don't have to travel to Iraq. How many Americans who ask me, can I travel to Iraq? I said, yes, you can, but there is no need. You want to meet Iraqis, you can meet them in a regional country, in Europe, even in the United States. There are good companies, Iraqi companies in all fields. You have partnership with them, agreement, legal one, and they can do the work for Iraqis can easily move in Iraq, much easier than Americans or foreigners or Europeans. The risk is less for Iraqis, and they can do the job properly. And there is ways of, do all the accounts and, but in general, there are good number of companies investing in Iraq, not to what we hope. We hope that would be more.
And you can also deal with anybody in Iraq via Skype. You don't have to travel there. I apologize for not having given you the floor.
Hi, thank you very much for being here with us today. My question is, we have a number of students here in the hall here who have been studying a village in southern Iraq, something about a village in southern Iraq, largely a Shia village in southern Iraq, and at least part of the life of that village are making various pilgrimages to Shia holy sites. And it's hard not to read the New York Times or the newspaper today and see that many of these holy sites have been the object of various kinds of bombings and their counter bombings as well. So it doesn't take place in the book, but it takes place in modern day life. And I was wondering how people in Iraq understand these bombings. Do they see them largely as religious confrontations? Do they see them largely as you were suggesting, remnants of the old Saddam regime? Do they see them largely as outsider terrorist groups, networks of terrorism? And depending on how you answer, maybe also tell us a little bit how the Iraqi government is actually trying to address this problem for ordinary Iraqis.
Well, the famous attack against the Holy Shrine in Samarra was in February 2006 when the whole shrine was demolished by the explosion. It was a huge explosion. And that triggered a sectarian conflict. Some Shiite ignorants start to attack Sunni mosques, burn them down. Some Sunnis start to attack the Shiite. And Iraq was on the verge of full-scale sectarian war. The good news, I'm telling you, this is from experience, because I was there then, that neither the Sunnis nor the Shiite were willing to fight each other or to kill each other. And then the investigation showed and proved that it was Al-Qaeda behind that attack, not an Iraqi Sunni or, So Al-Qaeda tried to, and by the way, there is a letter written by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, to Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda in the world. And in that letter, it's available in English on the internet. It was published by CPA, Coalition Provisional Authority, during Bremer time. And the letter was confiscated when somebody called Gul tried to cross the borders to get the letter from Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, Osama bin Laden. Basically, he said, if the Iraqi government gets stronger, control the situation in Iraq, we'll have no option but to pack and leave as we did in Afghanistan. And the only solution, as he put it, is to bring a sectarian war between Shia and Sunnis. So I believe sometimes Al-Qaeda, sometimes they will attack the Sunnis, blame the Shia, attack the Shia, blame, because for them killing the Sunnis and the Shia, the sin. They have a philosopher say, we kill people. If they are innocent, they will go to heaven. If they are criminal, they go to hell. As simple as that. They divide, they decide who will go to hell, to heaven. So if we kill 50 people, innocent people will go to heaven and bad people will go to hell. I don't know where they will go, the killers. So after that attack, Al-Qaeda went to Sunni mosques. Let's attack the Shia, let's attack the Shia. People said, you are not Palestinians, they are our families. But, they went to Sunni mosques, it's the same story. So both Sunni and Shia. And that was the important thing to save Iraq from a full-scale sectarian war. Not the army, not the police, because we didn't have a strong army, we didn't have a strong police. We have the nation who was against these sectarian problems. Now, they attack not only Shiite mosques, but Sunni mosques, and they attack churches. But let me give you a good example. I saw a man on TV. He was a guard in a mosque who planted a bomb during Ramadan in the mosque to kill people. During Ramadan, people will go after iftar to the mosque to say prayers. And this guy who was a guard in the mosque, who's supposed to protect the mosque, he planted a bomb during Ramadan while people are fasting to kill them for $900. So you can't say he's a Sunni against the Shia or he's a Shia against the Sunni because he's guarding the mosque. This is one. The second example, somebody was on TV from Sadr City, which is a Shia neighborhood, who was arrested because he was killing some of the people. And the Sheikh of the tribe said, actually he killed his cousin for money. So it's not a matter of, in the world, Sunnis against Shiite, Shiite against Sunnis, but I'm telling you, there are Shiite who are killing Shiite, and there are Sunnis who are killing Sunnis. Why? Because Saddam made an army of criminals. For 40 years, he was training people to kill, and those people being Sunnis, Shiite, some of them could be non-Muslims, I don't know. But all they know is how to kill people. Even if you say, we'll forgive you, what is your qualification? Nothing. What's your skills? Nothing. all they can do is kill people and they get money. That's the real problem we are facing.
Floor is open. No, you've already asked a question. Right at the back. No.
You mentioned that 2003, Iraqis started identifying as Iraqis instead of, referring to their ethnic background. Why do you think in 2003 that happened?
I didn't understand what you mean. I didn't say 2000.
No, he did. He is accusing me.
I'm not accusing, I'm just
Of
saying.
course, you are very accusative. But the point is that what I said has been completely debunked by Ambassador al-Bayati, because he says, Ambassador Kamal, you are wrong.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. My question is, you said previously they identified as Iraqis, and then after 2003, or beginning in 2003, they were fractionalized into different groups. My question is, why in 2003 and not previously?
What Ambassador al-Bayati has said is that that statement by Ambassador Kamal was not correct. He said the sectarianization of Iraq started at the time of Saddam Hussein, because that was part of Saddam's policy to divide the country into different sects. And so my perception is a faulty perception. The correct perception is this was part of Saddam's policy of divide and rule. And so we are today paying for the fruits of a policy which was followed by Mr. Saddam Hussein. That is the correct answer. My perception was wrong, and I apologize for it. Question. I would like to ask you, you want a question? No, she is just saying, I want food. I want to ask one final question before we break up. We will not get the chance of sitting intimately with a person of your preeminence. And so I want, many of the people here are following a course at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and that includes the diplomats. The course is on trying to establish what the world will look like 10 years from today. I want to ask you that question vis-a-vis Iraq. Where will Iraq be 10 years from today, given all the facts that you know, given the sectarianization which has taken place, given the fact that you have a law and order problem in which investment is being blocked by car bombs, and the fact that you are a country with great potential, but unable to realize that potential fully? What will be Iraq 10 years from today? And given also the Saudi changes, the geopolitical changes of Saudi Arabia and Iran, where will you be 10 years from today?
I'm optimistic by nature, and I'm optimistic because I know the Iraqi people. And I feel that the Iraqis will go back to the golden days when they live in peace and harmony, regardless of their ethnic, religious, or sectarian differences. However, I'm also realistic, and I realize that we could go either way. So either we go to a better world, not only in Iraq, the region and the world. It's in our hands. The people, the nations, the governments. We could go to peace and harmony, we could go into the wars. So it's completely in our hands. And I hope that the Iraqis, whether they are government or the people, will be wise enough to realize we have no option but to live with each other, to coexist, to learn to understand each other, to respect each other, and to tolerate each other. We have no other options. In war situation, it's lose-lose situation. In peace, it's win-win situation. So which one is better? There's no winner in a war. We fought 8 years against Iran. We all lost. We invaded Kuwait, and Kuwait was liberated. We all lose. So live in peace. with ourselves, among ourselves, and with neighbors, and with the whole world, is the best way forward. I hope that this message will reach out to people, and we are convinced that the best way is to have peace and to follow diplomatic ways, especially our diplomats, and the best ways for diplomats is to bring people together and to bring their countries together. That's how I believe.
On that optimistic note, and given the due attention that we must pay to Dr. Murphy's hunger, may I thank you on behalf of Fairleigh Dickinson University for your courtesy in coming here and for the great frankness and sincerity with which you have outlined the problems and future of Iraq.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador.